amazing. Well, I hope you all got some fantastic, stylish insights from our last fashion panel. I'm really excited to kind of pivot gears a little bit into the world of climate tech. Now, we're here in San Francisco, which many would argue is the heart of a lot of climate tech innovation, lots of companies and organizations that work in this field. But not everyone exactly knows what climate tech means and how folks can even begin to think about breaking into the industry. So I'm so excited that I have this awesome panel of leaders in the climate tech industry who have done things from actually funding climate tech companies, to working at climate tech companies, to understanding, what kind of skill sets you may need to be a candidate that they would want to hire for their teams. So I'm so excited to have them share a little bit of their expertise, and would love you all to give them a round of applause. All right, great. So just to dive into the basics, could you each give us some insight into who you are and tell us a little bit more about your journey into climate tech? And we'll start with you.
All right. Hi, nice to meet you all. I'm Julia Perilli. I work at 12. We're a carbon transformation company, so we are taking CO2, carbon dioxide, and instead of letting it go out into the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas, we are turning it into useful things like jet fuel and plastics and clothing and things like that. So a novel technology, doing super cool stuff. It sounds kind of science fiction-y, but I promise it's real. And then, yeah, it's super cool. In terms of journey to there, I started on the software side, completely unrelated to climate tech, and I spent about 15 years in financial software, where I did a whole bunch of technical things and then started managing teams that were unrelated to my expertise. And then I wanted to make a shift into climate work, probably much like all of you. I was like, this is the thing I want to do. I want to work somewhere that's more aligned with my heart. And I just went for it, and I landed at 12, and I've done what feels like 17 different jobs since I got there, so I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about that. But yeah, definitely talk about pivot for sure.
If not,
This works, we can pass it on. It's a pleasure to meet everybody. My name is Brian. I'm the head of strategy for a company called Intuitive AI. What we're probably most well known for is a solution called Oscar Sort. If anybody has ever stood in front of a waste bin and been confused, then I actually see some poorly sorted waste over there, unfortunately. And you've thrown an item away and it went in the wrong bin. Unfortunately, that is not a great thing. We've developed a technology that uses Edge AI, which we'll get into at some point in time, to detect material in people's hands as they walk up to a bin, and then it directs them to put that item in the right bin. On average, we see about a 61% increase in proper sorting, and have seen recycling rates go from, I think it's about 87% to a 97% jump increase, almost doubling it, which in modern recycling, over the past 20 years, there's been basically no increase in recycling rates. How I got into my career, I was very fortunate for this company. The founders had been following me for several years and asked me to join, but many years prior to that, I was misdiagnosed with having HIV. And that changed my life, and I really wanted to, I was at a very big company, I wanted to move into an industry that I could really have an impact. And now that I have kids, I want to leave the world a better place.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mitchelle here. I'm the Chief Impact Officer at Skytruth. Skytruth is a conservation technology nonprofit that specializes in analyzing satellite data to reveal hidden environmental harm, to power biodiversity protection, climate action, and polluter accountability. My work and journey in the climate world actually started as a youth climate activist. I met Kristy in college, and I never thought I'd be working in the climate tech space. I was very ambitious and had very big visions of how to change the world, as many young people do in college. And after college, I decided that I wanted to explore different levers of impact. And I actually started working first with local governments on climate adaptation in the city. I started working in San Joaquin Valley as my first role as a Civic Spark AmeriCorps Fellow, which is a governance initiative AmeriCorps program in California. And after that, that really gave me a good lens on how to actually implement climate policy on the ground in California. And I ended up working and consulting with different Fortune 500s and environmental organizations, largely on environmental policy and advocacy. Got to work on some really interesting projects like the Klamath River Dam Removal and River Restoration Project, where I led outreach and organizational development, and I encountered this organization called Skytruth as one of my clients, supporting them on their overall strategy and growth as an organization. And I realized that I really wanted to connect the technologies that Skytruth was developing to the environmental community. The environmental movement, for the most part, has historically lacked access and capacity to really integrate these emerging technologies and sensors. And I joined Skytruth to really equip civil society with emerging technologies. And so here I am with Skytruth, really supporting journalists, civil society, researchers to drive climate action and biodiversity protection with emerging satellite monitoring.
All right, so hi everyone. My name's Jonathan Azoff, and for better or worse, I'm probably most well known for forcing climate nerds to have fun, not take themselves so seriously. But in all seriousness, I do a few things. First and foremost, I co-founded and run a climate tech VC or deep tech VC called SNOCAP, where we help scientists start businesses. I'm also the board president of a farm sanctuary and climate tech incubator in upstate New York called Sweet Farm. And I'm also involved in a lot of community and storytelling activities. That's how I've intersected with Kristy many times. Those include being the initial sponsor of the Climate Film Festival in New York. We're now in our 4th year and do a lot of work with narrative design and storytelling in climate. I'm also involved with 9/0. Many of you who work in climate have probably been to the 9/0 in San Francisco. I helped bring it up to Seattle, where I live today, and we'll have some more exciting news about how that's expanding soon. I can't quite share too much yet, but other than that, I really love community, and I'm involved with Work on Climate, which is a huge community of climate builders, about 45,000 members today. And yeah, I love helping people find their path in climate, find their careers in climate. As far as my path, you know, I'm a nerd. I love science and sci-fi, and I grew up watching things like Star Trek and Back to the Future. I thought I was going to get a hoverboard and a replicator, but after 20 years in San Francisco, I ended up with SAS to manage my SAS, and I just decided that that's not really what I want for myself. And similarly, I ended up having a family and kids, and I decided to start to change my mindset from writing my resume to start maybe writing my obituary. So now I get to spend my days helping scientists build amazing businesses, and I truly feel like we're bending the arc of what people think venture can invest in, what young people can go and have careers in, and that's what I'm excited about.
We give them all a round of applause. What a panel, right? Who curated it? So, you know, I'm just interested to just dive into the trends. You know, we love to just break things down and make things really practical here at the pavilion. So I'm just interested, you know, anyone can take this question, but what are some hiring trends or growing sectors or technologies that you're seeing being really, you know, hot and trendy right now in climate tech that you think people who want to get into the space should know? Like, where are you seeing the areas for biggest growth, or you know, types of companies that have been getting a lot of investment, who may be hiring on the horizon in the next couple of years? Would love any thoughts or insights.
I'll start. I think obviously AI is probably the hottest trend at this point in time. We all have opinions on AI, if we're using AI for good or if we're using AI for bad. I think one of the things that was said earlier, and I will repeat this, but if you can imagine a computer, the first computers were the size of a room, right? And now we have computers that are 1,000 times stronger just in our pocket. what I would say is the responsibility side of AI, but it will get better, it'll get more efficient. We need to use it more effectively, so AI is a trend. But I would say a lot of times we think about sustainability as it has to cost more, right? And I think we need to get away from that trend of thinking it has to cost more, because there's a thing that we practice in our business of the power of and. So what does your product do? It solves this problem, and it solves this problem, and it solves this problem, and it solves this problem. So then you can go to, let's just say, an airport and actually have your product be given to an airport for free. And through different means, it may generate a profit of $30,000, our device. And you can reinvest that money into the airport so that they can do projects that are more sustainable. So it doesn't have to be more expensive.
I love that, by the way. We were just nerding out a little bit about AI for good and AI for not so good. So it's nice to hear the positive side of the AI trend. I did not give you all the background of what my current responsibilities are, which do highlight why I can answer this question a little bit. But in my role, I'm the VP of Corporate Ops at 12, and so I have oversight over HR, supply chain, IT, some software engineering, some business strategy, and some other stuff, so kind of a larger collection of things. And so in terms of trends and like what's hot, AI is obviously taking off, but to getting into climate tech, like what we see that we need are jobs that you would not necessarily associate with climate tech jobs. So I need people who are deep in supply chains. That can come from anywhere, and you can get started on that in any kind of job and then come into ours. Manufacturing is really important for us because we are manufacturing jet fuel. We are manufacturing our technology to make the jet fuel. We need software engineers, things like that, mechanical engineers, scientists. So when you think about like what we do specifically, you might think we just need electrochemists or analytical chemists, but in fact, it's a lot of these other kind of more cross-functional business side jobs that are important. So no matter what your background is, I think you can get into climate tech with your transferable skills from a variety of other, what you would think to be unrelated industries that are just super important to getting things done.
Sure, happy to go. I think I come at it from a lens of the Earth observation community, using satellite data and geospatial data, and there is an explosion of different companies, startups, nonprofits that are collecting, whether it's methane data, in our case, ocean pollution data, and then as we were taking all this data together, what does it mean to actually turn data into action? And so that's a big trend for us right now in our own community, is bringing in talent that actually can translate this data in meaningful ways to targeted end users, people who can talk to government agencies, people who understand both the tech and the science. I think is really, really important in this intersection of AI and Earth observation to actually generate meaningful impacts and to actually have uptake on these different technologies that are being developed.
So the question, as I understood it, was like what jobs are popular in climate tech, right? So just by show of hands, how many people think they can define what climate tech is? Like raise your hand if you think you have a very solid definition of climate tech. I think this is why answering that question is particularly hard and problematic. I have a different take. So anyone who knows me knows that I don't like the idea of like creating yet another bubble. Like I bring people in all the time, contrarians, people who you wouldn't think have anything to do with climate, and that's very intentional because it's more, at least from my definition, it's more of a mindset. Anytime you take the conscientiousness of like what you are doing to the planet into account, into your daily life, you are, in my opinion, in climate tech. That means you could be working for a big corporation like, I don't know, Amazon, for instance, and you could be in a software engineering job that has nothing to do with climate tech, but maybe you make some small decisions in how you write your algorithms so that they use less energy. And in my opinion, you now work in climate tech. So when people ask me what are the most relevant or important jobs in climate tech, I would actually ask a different question. I would ask, look around you and ask yourself what motivates you, what are the things you're excited to go do, and go find the intersection between the most ignored categories, the categories that don't have anyone being conscientious about the impact of that particular job on the planet, and go do that job. it doesn't have to be the most popular thing. We need a lot of people doing a lot of different things. If everyone tried to be the unicorn founder in climate tech, no one would solve busing and like mass transit, right? Like we need a different way of thinking about climate tech that is not about a category, but about what we individually can do.
I love that, I love that. And I think it's an important message that like, even if you don't work in the climate or environmental sector, I think we've gotten a lot of tips from speakers today that it can be even more impactful that you're doing climate actions in your own workplace, even if you aren't a sustainability professional. And so I really love that message as well, because it comes down to skill sets that you can apply. You know, when it comes down to climate issues and climate tech, it's about problem solving, and you can do problem solving in lots of different categories and workplaces. So I love that. So for Brian, you know, going back to this AI question, because it's come up a bit during today's session, you know, someone asked earlier, you know, there's concerns about like AI and climate work and how those things intersect, and you know, AI taking away jobs versus like, could AI actually be an opportunity to skill up people in this place, in this work, but then would you want to be skilled up by a model that's also like depleting resources? It's like an endless cycle, you know? I feel like a lot of people are struggling with some of these options, but I love what you were saying, that like, you know, there's opportunities for optimization and for development and growth, but I just wanted to ask, like, how, you know, it's kind of a bigger question, but like, how can people navigating getting into climate work with AI, you know, lean into it in a way that is being cautious and aware and critical, but also being aware that like, it's here, you know what I mean?
Yeah, there were a lot, that was a lot of questions.
There's a lot of questions. I guess I'm trying to, you know, how do we lean into the contradiction and allow people to build skills in this space while also understanding that there's a lot of people in the climate community that have a lot of fears about the future of AI as well.
I'll maybe share some stories and context and then get into that as well. But if you go to California Academy of Sciences or the Exploratorium or the Salesforce Transit Center, UCSF, or a lot of different properties around the world, you're going to see our technology. And in our name it says intuitive AI, and we say AI recycling assistant. We're actually quite proud of it. I think most people who are in climate tech shy away from it. We actually use AI for good, and we use on the edge. And so by show of hands, do people understand what it means to be using AI on the edge? No problem. Okay, so we use an extremely powerful processor. And so when someone walks up and it shows an item, it actually processes all that information locally on the computer. So it is not pinging the cloud, not going to a data center, not going back to the cloud, and not going back to our device. So I think at some point in time, private clouds, private AI built into their own systems will be extremely helpful. So I think looking at a company, looking at how they are using AI is really important. And I think you can use AI for good, right? And so that's really important, is how is the AI being used? And is it being used for something that is advancing cancer, all these different things as well?
Mitchelle, do you want to add on to that?
Sure. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question that I think we're all grappling with. And I think part of the answer here is we have to acknowledge the harms, and we have to be transparent about those impacts. And so from my lens and my organization's lens, in terms of data collection, we're currently in an R&D sprint on actually understanding some of the harms of data centers and understanding what we can detect from geospatial technology. And I think every single organization out there is probably building their own AI policy and thinking about how do we actually ethically, responsibly integrate these different technologies into our own teams. Different team members have very different perspectives on it. Even as a tech-forward organization, some of my team members are very averse to using AI tools. And some of those concerns are incredibly valid. I have team members who are designers who have significant concerns about using AI in their design work. And so I think for us, a lot of it is, again, really leaning into those, the inherent contradiction of economic growth and AI and the climate, our climate goals, I think one discussion that we had at New York Climate Week on a similar panel was really around, are we recreating the harms of some of the industries that we're trying to address in terms of reducing their emissions? We know that this is ultimately going to increase emissions, and it could be a significant source of revenue for the fossil fuel industry. So what are some of the important ways in which data can support governance and decision making? And I don't know if there's a clear answer at this point, but I think we should lean into that with data collection and really having conversation as an environmental community.
I just want to add on a little bit to that and kind of bring in what Kristy and John were saying before, both about problem solving, and you can find problems to solve anywhere. I was talking about this right before the panel, but I'm reading this book about the downstream kind of extractive industries that underlie AI, and I'm reading about it. That's like another zillion problems to be solved, and I don't want to be a AI, I don't know, someone who believes there's no other way, but I don't think there's going back from this technology. Like, the world is adopting it, it's happening, and so instead of thinking about how can we stop it, I'd rather think about how can we do it ethically and how can we solve those downstream problems. So when John was saying, can I optimize my algorithm to use less energy? Sure, like that's a problem to be solved. Can we find a better way to source the lithium that goes into the computers that fund the data centers that power the AI? Yes, that's also a problem that can probably be solved. And so I hope we'll see a lot more industries and companies pop up trying to solve all of these problems such that it is not as inherently, not wasteful, but doesn't rely as many resources as we were talking about.
Julia, I am throwing this next question back to you as someone who does active hiring in this space.
Yeah.
So when you're, looking and recruiting for talent, I would love if you could go over what are some of the things that a candidate can do to stand out to you in the stack and the sea of the noise, both from like a soft skills and a hard skills standpoint when you're kind of scanning through and trying to source candidates.
Yeah, I think that, and I've been thinking about this a little bit, I think the major thing is less on the hard skills, because I think there's a sea of hard skills that are out there, and if we need an electrochemist, we need an electrochemist, and that's what we need. And so what distinguishes anyone in that background, or if we need a supply chain person or whatever, it's about that problem solving. It's about your critical thinking. It's talking about, I saw this problem, I took the initiative to solve it. This is how I thought through the problem. And this is what I did about it. This is how I worked with other people to get it done. This is how I had like a larger perspective, and this is what I learned. This is how I messed up, and this is what I gained from it. I think being able to demonstrate the way you think through things and how you collaborate is super important. And then I think a lot about like our company principles, which I worked to help design, and like a big one is like say the thing for us. And so for us, it's, are you the type of person where if you see something that's wrong, or you disagree with a piece of data, or you disagree with the way we're doing something, do you sit on it and go, oh, I guess that's the way it's always been done, I'm gonna let it go? Or do you say, hey, like we could be doing this better, or that conclusion you drew from that data is incorrect, here is my hypothesis. We want the people who are gonna speak up, and I think if you can demonstrate that goes like a huge way in terms of standing out.
That's great. And my next question is for you. I guess going back to the bubble of climate tech, that can sometimes feel like a bubble. But I want to demystify things. I think that's how you start breaking the bubble, right? And I know that you work with a lot of different interesting startups and getting them off the ground or building foundational teams. So I'm just wondering, what are some of these startups that when they're first scaling or they're really doing those first hires, from what you've seen, what's the type of personality or type of person that they're looking for?
So I think it's important to understand what I invest in, because it will color the answer to that question. I spent 20 years building venture-backed software businesses. But software, and even AI, is an optimization. Anytime you see a software company, it's optimizing something. I've struggled to find a software company that doesn't fall into that category. And please, if you know of one, tell me. But as far as I can tell, software only optimizes existing systems. My fundamental problem with that is it's the systems themselves that are not working the way we want them to, right? It doesn't matter, like the thought experiment in my mind is if we have a benevolent AI, and I promise I'll answer the question. If we have like this all-knowing, all-loving AI that solves all of our problems, have we solved climate change? And the answer is probably not, because we still need to take planes places, we still need to drive, you know, we still need to eat food. And so I focus on physical businesses that are trying to use first principles thinking and years of research and science to try to change how we interface with the world. And where there are natural solutions, I'm also interested in those as well. So that said, the sort of people that I work with tend to be scientists. They tend to be engineers, but not necessarily software engineers. Sometimes they're mechanical engineers, nuclear engineers. And then there are software engineers as well, but rather than software being the product, they may be helping kind of bring the product to market or help facilitate how the product enters the market. So what I can say, especially for a Bay Area audience, is if you're working in software or you're looking to break into the sorts of companies that I support, one of the first things you should be thinking about is like, do I necessarily want a job where the thing I'm building is the product? Or am I willing to buy into an idea and plug in however I can best help that idea, right? I can tell you, and I learned the hard way, and I'm very guilty of this, when one works in software in Silicon Valley, one can center themselves a lot, like as the product, as the important lever of change. But when one starts thinking about problems and solutions as a broad idea and a team-based effort, you may find that your position within that solution may be different than you thought. So what I would say is, once again, think about the problems that are interesting to you, think about who's solving it, and think about how you fit in with them. It's more of an active listening exercise and more of a reflection on yourself than it is about like, I need to fit this exact role because everyone's hiring for this role, right? That may work if you want to ride the AI boom, and be, in that case I would just say be an AI researcher. I'm sure you'll get a job somewhere. But like, if you want to fit into the sort of companies that I work in, you need to first figure out which of the categories are interesting to you, solar, energy, mobility, whatever it is, and then figure out where the gaps are and where you'd like to be involved. I can promise you there's a company that could use your help, because it is naturally, especially now with AI being so popular, a lot of these positions are ignored and could really use help. So yeah, happy to talk to anyone who would want to know what those are too.
That's great. And before I get to the lightning round, I want to ask Mitchelle another question about just nature-based solutions and this nature-based tech, which is an interesting new realm that a lot of people are interested in, because nature-based solutions, kind of learning how we can find that world that uses tech, but like in harmony with nature is a lot of the things that you and your team are thinking about. I've had a lot of people really excited about the concept of a solar punk economy and thinking about what does it mean for us to build a world where we can live in harmony between nature and tech and all of these things. I'm just wondering, like, with the data your team is building, twofold question, like, what do you all what's the kind of impact you guys want to do with that data, and what do you think are the kind of roles that may come out of, that impact-driven work that is associated with that?
On a Friday afternoon. I think I'll kind of center it on one of the tools that we have launched and developed, which is really focused on the Global Biodiversity Framework's Target 3. So 196 countries adopted this goal of protecting 30% of Earth's lands and waters by 2030, which is a massively ambitious goal. We're well behind that on both terrestrial inland waters and marine conservation or protection. And so there is this significant need to use technology to monitor these vast territories that are in remote parts of the world, and the people who are on the front lines to protecting these really precious ecosystems lack capacity, lack resources, and lack the technology to really understand, is there a threat that is affecting our ecosystem? We are using machine learning, for example, to detect oil spills in the ocean. And we're using this technology to ensure that it actually gets to the right hands of enforcement agencies, advocates, researchers to really understand where protections should be in place. We know that for marine protected areas to generate the greatest amount of climate benefits, they need to have really stringent protections, meaning there shouldn't be overfishing, there shouldn't be any industrial harms happening on these protected areas. So that requires a lot of coordination with those stakeholders. So in terms of the types of roles that it requires, first, it requires the analysis of the data itself, generating those insights. My team, for example, consists of different data scientists who are going through maybe 5 years of satellite data to understand where are vessels and their pollution impacting ecosystems the most, and how should this inform global biodiversity protection. And then what happens after that insight is generated? We're communicating it to different stakeholders. So we have PR teams that are really working closely with media outlets who can ensure that the data is communicated clearly and accurately. So that's really a whole set of roles that I have been building for my team. And last, but certainly not the least, it's the folks that can work hand in hand with the stakeholders on the ground. We call them our user support team. So it's folks who understand the data. In our case, it's geospatial data, and understanding how is it applicable to this problem set? How can we actually drive protections forward? What does this mean for nature-based climate solutions moving forward?
Amazing, amazing. So lightning round to finish us off. I would love if each of you could plug, a resource, a fellowship program, something very tangible that folks could maybe check out, a podcast, anything. If they are even, climate curious to get into the climate tech space, how you'd recommend maybe they could get started.
I can go first. Well, first of all, I think you should check out all the Brown Girl Green content and the related job boards. There are, of course, no shortage of job boards, but I love human-to-human connection, and there's some really great communities out there. So I already mentioned Work on Climate. Without Work on Climate, I would not have been able to facilitate the climate tech community in Seattle, where I live now. And I know it's facilitated community in many places. Often you find your jobs in climate through your friends in climate. So go make as many friends as you can in climate. That would be the simplest path. And to that end, of course, Work on Climate, but here we are lucky to have a 9-0, which is, in my opinion, one of the more serious places. Like if you really want to get into like a venture-backed, rapidly scaling climate tech business, 9-0 is a place for climate builders, and it is certainly, when you're ready to take that leap, I think it's a great community to join as well. Outside of that, I think there's a lot of room for people outside of technical skill sets to help as well. As I mentioned, I've been involved with the film festival for a few years now, and that's not an accident. I think it's incredibly important that we don't forget that there have been a few lobbies that have been very good at storytelling for years, and we have a lot of catch-up to enter to their level of skill. And a lot of the scientists I work with do not take storytelling seriously, and I think it's to their detriment. So I think any of you who are in marketing, communications, PR, and any related sort of narrative field, your skills are incredibly valuable right now, and you should be getting involved with any of those organizations I just mentioned to help meet founders and people who can benefit from your skills. So.
And good thing the marketing and storytelling panel is right after this one.
I'll give a shout out to the fellowship that got me my start here in the climate space, which is the Civic Sparkling AmeriCorps Fellowship. I see a lot of young people in the room. California has a lot of really exciting work, especially at the local government level. And so if you really want to get your foot in the door on climate and not quite sure what that might mean for you, I think it's a great resource. There's several other fellowships out there that provide that guided path for you to really dig into the climate space. Climate is a really, really, really broad world. So I would say don't count yourself out of it. And I think lastly, I'd probably give a shout out to a resource that I learned more about earlier this week, which is Project Drawdown Explorer. which is a really, really great resource to dig into the science of different solutions and really demystifying what actually works and what doesn't work.
Hello, there. I agree with everything that was said, and I'll add an and to it. I think by you just being here, you're really taking the right steps, and continue to put yourself out there, as uncomfortable as it may be. For me, personally, I would love to have somebody that I could help mentor. So if anybody's interested in a mentor, I'm the only one here, I think, with a lot of gray hair. And that's not just because of my kids, but I've had a lot of experiences with startups, going public, being acquired, all different things. So happy to have somebody if they're interested in being a mentee, being mentored, sorry.
I love that. Yeah, I'm gonna go back and write down some of these things I heard as well. I'm gonna take this in a different direction than I expected. So on a practical framework, there are a lot of non-technical jobs to get into this space. And something that I did when I was trying to get into this space that I would recommend anyone do, and it sounds really nerdy and weird, like journal out your whole career history so far and what you're interested in, and then try to identify how those things map to what's needed. So like, spend an hour on LinkedIn and look at jobs that you think are cool, figure out what they need, and then map that to stuff you've already done. It's a really concrete exercise that not only helps you figure out where you can slot into the industry, but also when you get to the interview stage, it's so helpful. It'll just like come super rapidly when you're talking because you'll have already done all of the thinking about like, how do I fit into this space? So cannot recommend that highly enough. And then this also sounds weird, but I promise, again, I've done this myself. If you use social media, which you probably do, seed it with what is interesting to you. So follow all of these things that we're talking about on your Instagram, on your TikTok. I, via TikTok, ended up finding my job at 12. I ended up in a weird climate job space on TikTok algorithm. I don't know how it knew that's what I wanted. That brought me to climate base, and that brought me to 12, and it was like a real weird journey, but now I've seeded all of my algorithms with like interesting AI news, interesting tech space news, like space stuff, climate stuff, and it'll just keep feeding itself, and then you'll find opportunities you never realized that you would find, and you'll be super well informed on the things that you care about, which can then help you identify other problems you may want to solve. If you don't want to buy into someone else's idea, you might have a cool idea just by looking at these problems. So read a lot, seed your social media algorithms, and find cool stuff to care about.
Amazing, amazing. Can we give them all a round of applause?